So kind of the four things I talked about: infrastructure, police, fire, and parks and rec. If we're going to move into providing subsidies and trying to bring in a different type of lifestyle almost, because I moved here 6 years ago for the safeties and the schools. I would have moved to Inman Park or Buckhead if I wanted to deal with things like the district. So like I said, I want to retain a safe residential community with parkland. So.
Thank you.
So 17 years ago, when my husband and I moved here, we had our oldest child was 6 months old, and we picked Johns, well, unincorporated Fulton County because of the residential feel, because of the good schools, and because of how lush and green it was, whether it's parks or just the landscaping in front of the neighborhoods. And back then, there weren't as many neighborhoods as there are today. So I think for Johns Creek, we need to retain that. I think that's what makes Johns Creek distinctive, is when you drive around, it's just a beautiful city to drive through, whether you're doing 55 or 25. I think that that's really pretty. And I think maintaining our neighborhoods and, like I said, we're all neighbors, and that's the piece, the openness, the communication. I think that that goes away when you start becoming more of a city environment, because people become less engaged with their neighbors. And I think that's what makes Johns Creek great, and I think that's why we're the #1 city in Georgia to live in, and #3 city to live in the United States.
Thank you. Stephanie, currently the tax base is 81% residential and 19% commercial. Do you think we need to diversify the tax base, and if so, by how much do we need to diversify it?
I do not believe we need to diversify the tax base. I think 54 million is sufficient. That's approximately what we bring in revenue. And I think before we start looking at any tax increases, we need to really look at expenses. I think there are lots of opportunities to review and streamline, and then you have a different conversation about revenues.
So do you think that long-term, the current revenue, and as it will grow, as property values increase, will be able to fund all of sort of the needs and the desires of the community?
It's hard to tell from my perspective 20 years out, because we don't know. Right now we're in flux because we have the district, that's a conversation, and we have our residential community. And so like with the purchase of that Colley Creek last night, the question is the water reclamation plant going to be turned on again, and is Johns Creek going to take that on? So I think there are different conversations about what makes up Johns Creek, but I think as of today, if things don't change, I think we have more than enough, and then that's a conversation we have to look at. And the question is, do you up the millage rate? Do you do bonds? And I think as we've been a startup city now for 8 years, we're going on to 10 years. We need to figure out what true governance state looks like from a financial perspective and a functional perspective, and then figure out from there where we need to go.
Thank you. Chris?
Can you repeat the question?
Currently, our tax base is 81% residential and 19% commercial. Do we need to diversify the tax base? And if so, how much do we need to diversify it? And then whatever you might want to speak to in terms of whether or not we have enough funding for the future.
Yeah, we've heard that number thrown around a few times, but businesses actually do pay more than that 81% to 19% ratio. But I would also challenge that.
What do you think that number is?
It's about 70-30.
Okay.
So, but at the same time, like you said, the needs and wants, and I'd like to separate what our needs and wants. The reason the district has been proposed to get more businesses in, to put some more of the tax base on that, is that we have all these capital projects, but you have to think about some of the capital projects that are needs. They were saying the natatorium, and that finally was removed from some of the capital projects, but that was $12 to $15 million. They were talking about turf fields. Turf fields are about 50% more expensive than grass fields. So I would like to look at what are truly needs versus just desires. And then, like Stephanie alluded to, we can look at the spending. I'm a research scientist, statistician by trade, and I look at the trends, and I found that, I don't know, about 5 to 10% that we could eliminate from the budget without impacting service levels at all. So it wouldn't impact police, fire, things like that. The biggest one is our public-private partnership with CH2M Hill, which is about $5.5 million. We pay the CH2M Hill employees, and then we provide a 70% markup to those, to CH2M Hill. So CH2M Hill has this very lucrative contract that if we renegotiated, we could save $2.5 million like that tomorrow. So And that comes up in May, that contract, so.
Do you know if that contract has ever been renegotiated in the past?
It has in the past, I believe it was 5 years ago, and it's the same thing that they did in Dunwoody, and they saved $3.5 million in Dunwoody, kind of doing what I'm proposing as well, so.
Okay. Chris, if you want to hang on to the microphone, in your opinion, and certainly feel free to offer whatever comments you have about how the current city council handled situations in the last couple of years, but in your opinion, how long is too long for a city council seat to be left vacant?
I would have a special election at the next election. So, given the vacancies of this most recent term, I would have had it on the third Tuesday of March, because that's what the charter dictates. I would adhere to the charter because that's what we created to lead the vision of Johns Creek.
So obviously the city council thought that the charter said something different. Do you have any idea why that might have been? And I have not read that specific section. I'm just curious.
I don't think there's ambiguous language. I think the word shall means you shall have it at the next available opportunity. So.
Got it. Stephanie?
I agree. I think that the election should have been at the first available time frame. The reason that they didn't have it was it didn't specifically say that. So if you read the charter, it said you needed to have it at the next available, but it wasn't specific. It did say shall. You needed to have one. And so when they went to the attorneys told them, well, as long as you have it in connection with the November election, you will have met the specifics of the charter. But where the hitch comes in is it says if someone leaves their seat within 6 months of the end, the council can appoint. And so if you actually read it, just layperson, it definitely sounds like it should have been filled at the first available opportunity to do that. And it wasn't. And I think it should have been. And I think our charter needs to be, the language needs to be tightened so that we're not sitting, because we've sat more with open seats than not since we became a city.
And I would assume the issue is not necessarily as much, this is what the charter says, although I agree that's important, but making sure that our citizens have adequate representation. Do you think that there might have been some decisions that would have turned out differently had all 7?
Absolutely. I think there was an opportunity for hiring the architects potentially for the district. If there were different people on the council who could have had a conversation about that, that could have been different.
And are you mentioning that because you think that the planning in the first place was flawed, and so they're producing something that might not be as desirable as or as desired by the community? Had we had the right people?
I think that the conversation went straight from engagement of an architect, and so the conversation was never should we or should we not do a district. So the city paid for architects to talk about what Tech Park should look like and what renderings would look like when the city didn't own the property. So in essence, they were doing renderings to tell the private property owners what they should or shouldn't do. And then as the citizens became involved and started asking hard questions, the process stopped and the dialogue has changed. So the city's invested over $500,000 into the district for property they don't own. And so I think that having additional, it's not that it would have stopped, that's not the point. The point is having differing opinions so that you have different conversation with people who have different skill sets. And I think that dialogue, many times than not, in the city council meetings doesn't happen. And I think it should. I think differing views on different sides, you may not end up where each person wanted to be, but the conversation allows it to meet more in the middle.
Thank you. Chris, again, the original question was how long is too long for the city council seat to remain vacant, and feel free to comment.
Did I answer the first one? Yeah.
Did you answer that already?
Yeah. So what was the
Would you guys
follow-up?
like to hear it again? No, I'm just kidding.
But I do think,
I'm so sorry.
I do think one of the reasons why they said for voter fatigue, and it was to save money, but if you would have had a full representation, you might have had some checks and balances to save on particular vendor decisions or contracts that came up. So in hindsight, it could have saved a lot more money than whatever the election would have cost.
I have to admit, the first thing when I heard the news about the city acquiring the Coughlin Creek facility, I'm not saying I'm for or against it, but I thought to myself, I wonder if it would have been different had we had more people there. And again, I'm probably generally for it. I'm sorry to give you my comments here. Next question for Stephanie. Could a new proposed development generate enough traffic that you would oppose it?
At this,
Could a new proposed development generate enough traffic that you would oppose the development?
I think at this point, based on our traffic situation, we need to adhere to the 30-year land use plan, and that until we fix our infrastructure, one more vehicle really cannot be added to our infrastructure. So I would oppose it because it's coming to the city for a variance, and I think we've been indiscriminate. We've picked winners and losers. We've not consistently applied the same parameters to offering variances, and I think that's also a problem. So you either strictly adhere one way or you allow all variances. But at this point, we need to strictly adhere to that 30-year land use plan because our traffic, we can't manage the traffic of today.
And is it possible for us to have development that adds traffic and follow the 30-year comprehensive land use plan?
If it doesn't, for the most part, it's only coming before the council if they need to do a variance. So if it doesn't require a variance and it follows the land use plan, then yes, it will add traffic, but it's because that's how we laid out the land use plan.
Got it, thank you.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, yeah, if I'm having a hard time remembering who's supposed to answer the questions and what question we're on. Could a new proposed development generate enough traffic that you would oppose the development?
Well, yeah, and that cannot, from my understanding, that cannot be the only factor to not allow a rezoning. But if it violates the Steinberg guidelines on that and then the zoning ordinances, I mean, where are we going to rezone where it won't impact traffic? What development will not impact traffic in Johns Creek? And so that's always going to be a variable of concern. And it's kind of, until we get our traffic house in order, I don't think we can make capricious zoning decisions without looking at the traffic. So,
Thank you. Chris, we'll start with you. Now I can remember whoever's holding the microphone, so one who goes next on the left. The next one, have you read the Parks and Recreation Plan? And based on the Parks and Rec plan, what comments or observations do you have? And I'm going to combine two questions. Should that plan be expedited?
Well, did I read the 155-page strategiig plan?
Parks and Rec, yes.
The Parks and Rec strategic plan? The 155-page PDF?
I have not read it. Unfortunately, I'm an uninformed moderator here. The Parks and Rec plan came out in the last few months, correct? Yes. 105 pages?
It was 155 pages.
100?
Yeah. Well, I tried reading all 155 pages. It was
So
a lot of appendix. It was a lot of pictures. So, but there was two proposals where they had recommendations of how we should proceed in the next 10 years for Parks and Rec. And one of them was using the unassigned fund balance of about $34 million. And one of them was approaching bonds, and that amount was about $86 million. And the argument that the consultants said were that 77% of residents were willing to pay more for better Parks and Rec. Well, they made these assumptions on a survey that was open access and that you could do repeated times. So you could probably get better quality data putting this out on Craigslist and asking for people's input. It's a very poor survey methodology. As sampling bias, measurement error, it was not good to make an inference on this survey. And then, but for argument's sake, let's say that number was correct, it was 77%. What they did not show was that amount, of the 77%, 60% of those people wouldn't pay more than $10 extra a month. So that amounts to about $3 million extra a year. If we would make the proper expenditure cuts without impacting service levels, that could fund an extra service plan, or the Parks and Rec strategic plan. So I would not issue bonds. We could vet out the plan even further and put it to the residents during a next election as a non-binding referendum and say, this is the plan, this is how much it would cost, would you support a bond? But as it is now, we just purchased that $20 million, 133 acreage tract last night. So I think that will throw a whole new gun into the works of the strategic plan, because that was one of the things that they did want to focus on. They also wanted to focus on more of a tournament track, 200 plus acres. I just wonder where we're going to plan to put 200 plus acres of a tournament style park. And they also say it would be paid for through sales taxes and hotel taxes. Well, we only get 25% of hotel taxes, so that would probably be, I don't know, another $50,000 a year. And they also said it would be paid through sales tax, through loss. Well, we only get about 7.5% of sales taxes through the distribution. So it's not, the assumptions that they have for how we pay for it aren't adequately vetted. So I think it needs to be looked at further, long story short.
Thank you.
So I attended I believe it was the last Parks and Rec open meeting to engage the citizens, and it was the one at Newtown Park. And what came out of that was their survey. They only received, I want to say somewhere between 1,000 and 1,400 people that actually responded out of a city of 80,000 plus. So that was one thing that I found to be interesting. I can honestly say I haven't read all 155 pages because I've been a little busy over the last 8 or 9 weeks, but I did glance at the main parts of the report, and there were a couple things in there that still disturbed me. They talked about a trail system, and at the meeting that I was at, and then at a city council meeting, there are homeowners that live on Johns Creek. And in that strategic plan, it has a trail that's going through their backyard, and they, on each side of the Johns